Hello, ladies. It's good to see all of you. So, as you can see, Jen isn't here. So, Kristen here is with us, and she's going to end up introducing herself because I have nothing. But I did want to say that we kind of had a switch. So, we were going to do life skills and chores today, but instead, Kristen is very passionate about reading to your kids and being intentional with that. And so she asked, could I change it and speak about that? So we are going to be doing that today, and I'm very excited to hear what you have to say. So thank you for coming. Yeah.
Right, I'll put this up here. I'll take this. That's good. Okay, should I pin this on me? Sure. Okay. Okay, hopefully I won't be smacking this microphone the whole time. Okay, can you all hear me okay with it? Is it in the right spot for good volume? Okay. All right, well, good afternoon. I'm Kristen Durkee. Some of you probably remember me. Some of you were here, I think it was December, I was on the panel. And then I spoke last year as well. And so this year, I did have another topic, as Olivia alluded to, but I asked, would it be okay if I switched topics? Because as I was preparing, I just really felt like I needed to speak on something else. And I had sort of alluded to this last year when I spoke. So I just wanted to elaborate on it a little bit more this year. And anyway, I'll just start out with a little introduction, I guess, of myself since Jen's not here. She has my bio somewhere or something, so I'll try and do my best. So I'm Kristen Durkee. I have my husband, Alan, and I have been married 32 years. This year will be 33 years, and we homeschooled our 3 children, and they are like all married adults, and they have children of their own, which is really a huge blessing to us. We have 9 grandchildren, and we farm. Yep, one of them is here. 3 of them are back there in the back row. So the pleasure of having them here today. And all of our children were homeschooled throughout high school, but they were dual enrolled during high school, just to give you a little bit of background there. And they were dual enrolled at the public high school and then also at the community college. So we did kind of a conglomeration of things. And that is kind of typical of a lot of homeschool families. You just use whatever resources fit your situation the best. So anyway, today my subject is on sharing stories with your children, read alouds. And can I just see a show of hands before I start? I'm wondering what ages of children are represented in the audience here. So elementary. Okay. Does anyone have a high school student yet? Okay. 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 Middle school? Okay. All right. Okay. Okay, great. That's great. Okay. Well, my purpose today is to encourage you to share stories with your kids. Why to read children's literature aloud, and how to incorporate that then into your family life, and maybe some hints also about like what to read. And as it kind of turns out, winter is a perfect time for this talk because you just can't get out and do all the things. So it's such a great time to be at home and really focus and also to be able to escape to foreign lands and things like that through the world of books. So one of my favorite things to do when I'm not outside, that's probably my passion, is to be outside. But one of my favorite things to do when I'm not outside is to make a really nice, hot, steaming cup of Earl Grey tea, which is my favorite, and then sit down with a good book. And I've had quite a lot of experience doing that, in particular with my children over the years. And it kind of all started way back, as maybe it did for some of you, with a baby shower gift of a book. And with that baby shower gift came a note, and this came from a teacher who happened to be a friend of my mother's. And in that note, there was a little message, and I can't remember exactly the words, but I remember the idea, and it was just stressing the importance of reading to your baby. And I kind of thought, well, yeah. Okay, everybody knows that, right? But maybe we don't. Maybe we think we know. But hopefully today I'll be able to inspire you with some more facts that might encourage you along those lines. So since that day, I have kind of figured up that I have literally read thousands of books since this child right here was the baby at that shower. So if you figure this up yourselves, this is just to give you an idea. I mean, because it's a little bit mind-blowing, actually. So if you do just one book a week, okay, with like taking a couple weeks off, let's say, okay, so that's 50 books a year. If you do that for 12 school years, that's 600 books right there, okay? And then there's like the preschool years. This is just, I'm giving you guys like bare minimum right here, okay? You're gonna do way more than this probably. This is bare minimum. Okay, so, and then if you figure in the preschool years, where you're reading, one or two books every night, before bedtime or some more during the day, and you're doing that for like 4 years, that's like 1,400 books right there. So, and if you have that again, you're quickly getting up to, and then to 2,000 some books, if you add 2 or more books per night, that sort of thing. And if you add that to your original 600, that's 2,790. So, that's not counting any books that you might read for yourself, just for pleasure, or listen to as like an audiobook or anything like that too. So anyway, when I received that little note and that first that gift, I really had no idea that I was going to be reading that many books, and probably you as young moms didn't either. And I just didn't realize also the role that literature would play in helping to develop our children's character, and how it would provide those really precious moments together and memories that I would personally never trade for anything in the world. I didn't realize how it would help them to be able to work through their problems, and for instance, I'm thinking of an example about learning how to share with the younger ones that are in the back here, especially if they were to be reading a story about how to share, they could discuss that through the characters in the story and learn that in a way that you can ingrain it into them when it's easier for them to accept those truths when they're not having to apply it to themselves, that they're hearing other characters who are experiencing those same problems. You can help them to learn how to be kind. It can also help with challenging issues such as issues of faith and culture. So, and if anybody would have told me how well our children would perform on standardized tests in reading, I just probably wouldn't have believed that at the time. To me, that's just a bonus on top of all these other things that I hope to be able to share with you. So I think we've talked about this before. I think it kind of all comes down to what is your primary goal as a Christian parent. And if you've probably thought through that quite a bit, I'm sure, but mine as a parent and a grandparent is really to help the children know how much they're valued, to realize their own sinful nature and how much they need a Savior, to train that child's heart in righteousness and to implant in them the seeds of passion and love for the Lord that will reach beyond the boundaries of our home too. And sharing literature together has definitely been a means to that end, and much more. As a grandparent, it's a real privilege to be able to share literature and make precious memories with the kids, the grandkids. But as a parent, it's different. You'll never have these times back. It's such an intense period of time in your life, and it can really stretch you, but it's so precious, and you'll never have these types of years again. So I just want to encourage you, first of all, to start early. So research has kind of shown us, research in 1994 has led us to believe that unborn babies can hear and react to their mother's voices. And so reading to young children as well as babies can help you interact with them. And you all know this because you've all had preschoolers, and I can saw by the show of hands, everyone, pretty much is past that baby stage, or well, if you're, at least some of your children are past that baby stage. And if you're here interested in homeschooling, sure, that makes sense. But they can help you, reading books will help you introduce those concepts like we talked about, like being kind. You can say to your children, like, where's the cow? Where's the yellow bus? There it is. You're pointing these things out to them. You might say after reading something naughty that a character said, might say, uh-oh, Francis made that boy really sad. Or Francis was really kind to that boy, and so they had a good time together. We used to read this little story by Richard Scarry, Isn't Pig Won't Naughty? And I mean, it's kind of funny. Pig won't. Pig will and pig won't. And it's about obedience, and it's a good little story. So this is just an example. This is another one. Thank you, God. You can impart a heart of gratefulness to God and your children by just reading a simple little thing like this. It's just a little prayer book, and you can go over that with the youngest of kids. Just a thunderstorm. You've probably seen some of these little critters They're very cute. But this, children have fears, very real fears, and stories like this can help them to overcome some of those things and gives you an avenue to discuss. So also, in addition to starting early, I want to encourage you to keep going. So those to apply this to your middle schoolers and your high schoolers as well. So you might think reading aloud is a little like that could be a little bit more elementary. It might be your initial thought, but it actually is, studies have shown that it is very beneficial to continue reading aloud throughout the middle school and even early high school years because of some of the things we'll address in a little while. But I do want you to be thinking about that. This is not just applicable for your elementary students. So I'm just gonna set these right here. So while a lot of us know that reading is a good thing, a study for Reach Out and Read, which is a Colorado-based organization, shows that actually fewer than half of American parents actually read to their children daily. So we're living in an era where there is a plethora of children's literature available, so we don't really have much of an excuse. But it's true that even though this is true, fewer than 50% of us are reading to our kids daily. And they may be off doing their homework or they're reading somewhere else. And I know that was something that we did often, where you would give them an assignment and they would go complete that assignment. But if you want to look at your handout, there are a lot of benefits to reading aloud and spending that time together. And we will discuss some of those things now. Let's see. So the handout, I just wanted to go over for a minute. And one of the first things, and keep in mind these apply to both the gifted student and those with learning difficulties. This sitting down and reading, I just want you to picture yourself, first of all, before we even go over these, just sitting there with a book with your child. The physical connection that you're making with your child. You're strengthening a bond between the child and the adult reader. You're experiencing the pleasure of escaping into another land or adventure. This is a perfect time, like I said, for that. One of the stories that we read when our children were young was a book called The Kite Fighters. And that is an excellent book, and our children would go outside and play after that and have this wonderful, like, enriched playtime. And they would say things like, we had another one, whoa, I forgot I was attached to this. We had another one. I brought a whole lot of books over here that I can share with you, hopefully. We have Treasure Island. We have The Last Battle, Chronicles of Narnia. Any of these can be read aloud, even to younger children. If you are doing the reading, then they will gain understanding, even if it is above their reading level or their grade level, because you can explain things to them. You can take a minute, you can stop. Hey, do you get that? What happened there? Like, oh, that was hard for that boy or whatever. You can discuss those things. We read this, Young Fu of the Upper Yangtze, and this is a book about a little boy in China, and our kids would go outside and say things like, "Let's be Chinese people," they would say things like, "We're gonna go live in the woods and be Indians," and and then it helps you to develop a favorable attitude, or helps them to develop a favorable attitude toward books as an enrichment to their lives, stimulates cognitive development and critical thinking skills. Decisions have consequences, so they'll see that throughout the stories. It will help them to gain new vocabulary and syntax. I would also add to that enunciation. When you're reading out loud, they are hearing you reading out loud, and inflection, so that's key. to become familiar with story structures and aid in future composition of text, the ability to draw on reading background experiences, help stimulate the imagination, as I kind of said, give hours and hours of enriched playtime. Another thing that they would do they would play Kings and Queens of Narnia, or like Rescue the Princess. And it would be the orcs and Frodo, that sort of thing. All that, you know how many hours your children could spend just reliving these stories in various ways. Reading aloud can help stretch an attention span. So think about little boys and little children. So when we discuss starting early, you can really start to stretch those attention spans by establishing an early routine and or like I said, just stretch it out. Just maybe start with a few minutes, and then keep adding to that. You can start doing like short chapter books and, lengthen those and maybe do 2 chapters, maybe whatever works for you and whatever works for your child. You can also read anything. You don't have to stick with books. You can read what you're reading. You can read a magazine article or an article online. No, hardly anybody buys magazine anymore, but you could pull up an article online and you can read that out loud to your children. Also, benefits of reading out loud. If you're doing this together, you are going to be able to, your child's going to learn to empathize with other people's feelings and problems, widen horizons as they vicariously learn about the world, their own culture, their own heritage and other cultures. And I do have several books up here that you may be interested in looking at later that could help you with some of these. This is Books That Build Character, A Guide to Teaching Your Child Moral Values Through Stories. And you can find, these are not the only, these 3 books, there are more, so many more, but these are 3 that I used, and they're very helpful. Classics to read aloud to your children, selections from Shakespeare, Twain, Dickens, O. Henry, London, Longfellow, Irving, etc. Books children love, A Guide to the Best Children's Literature. These will all help you to decide what, you can look up according to what types of cultures that you might be interested in sharing with your children. If you're learning about a particular subject in school or time period in history, you can go to something like this and likely find, if you're, Shakespeare, you can pull out a little Shakespeare, and you don't have to read the entire thing. You can read an excerpt as well. You can help them to develop an interest in new subjects or hobbies. We had a book called Paddle to the Sea that was a part of a series by, I think it was Irving, Clancy Halling. And it's a very well illustrated book, as well as Newbery Honor Award-winning book, and have Men in the Mississippi, Seabird. There are lots and lots of diagrams in here, and this is a very useful series for learning geography. And just the Paddle to the Sea was about the Great Lakes, and it was about a little Indian that he carved a little canoe with a little wooden Indian in it, and he set it free in Lake Superior. And so it's the story of this little canoe, this little Indian in the canoe, and all the adventures that he goes on throughout the Great Lakes. And so we made a map of the Great Lakes and so on and so forth. And then our children were back in our creek, damming it up and pretending, and it's just great because they're developing interests in new things, and they probably wouldn't have ever thought about the Great Lakes or thought about the currents and the storms, and they wouldn't have learned about the systems up there that they have for the boats and safety and all of those things. They can learn new knowledge about nature, Nature books with pictures are awesome so that you can see how God's engineered and created such a fascinating and complex world. Helps bring geography to life and history to life. One of the books that I love so much is called Nothing Can Separate Us, the story of Nan Harper. And this is, I'll just read you the back. Nan Harper was just a child when she traveled with her father, Pastor John Harper, on the maiden voyage of the RMS Titanic. This riveting story recounts the events that fateful night, her father's heroism, and Nan's commitment to perpetuate the gospel message for which her father had so bravely died. So, and this, I guess Nikki, you wrote in here, but it says to Nikki from Mom. She wrote that, I didn't write it in there, that's cute. But this is also a series in the Beautiful Girlhood collection, and I really highly recommend this series. Rifles for Wadi is another one that can help bring history to life, and I'm going to talk just a little bit about this in a bit, so I won't get into it right now. But stimulate aesthetic development by exploring artistic media through illustrations. And one thing that we talked about a little bit during the panel discussion in December was, one of the questions was, what would you do differently if you had it to do all over again? And one of the things I mentioned was that I would put more of an emphasis on art and music. And one of the ways that you can do that is through literature. If good, well-illustrated literature, and also just the subject matter, because there are so many books that cover good art. And one of those I brought with me, and it is the story about Claude Monet and some of his artwork. And this is a really cute little story about a little girl in Paris and how she got to see many of Monet's paintings. Anyway, some of these are just really old books. Some of these I found in library, sales or giveaways. There are so many different sources, and we'll talk more about those. Also, one benefit is that it can assist with the resolution of personal problems. You kind of can call that bibliotherapy, I guess. And then it can help build character and to train vicariously for future encounters that they will have, moral, political, legal, social issues. We're facing a lot of things. Our kids are facing a lot of things, and our job is to train them. So we can do that, and one way we can do that is through great literature. So let me find my spot here. Okay, so that's a lot of benefits, but it's really not everything. It's just a kind of a brief summary. When schools encourage children to practice reading at home with parents, the children make significant gains in reading achievement compared to those who only practice at school. And that comes from a study, a 1997 study. And then fifth grade students demonstrated emerging signs of advanced thinking in addition to development of information quality judgment skills. That's from a study in 1998, Van Sledwright and Kelly. A 1990 study examined third graders' response to children's literature that was read aloud to them and determined the exposure fostered comprehension, discussion, writing skills, and promoted emotional involvement. Current research on critical thinking and cognitive development demonstrates the link between language and thinking ability. And Zhang and Alex in 1995 bemoaned the fact that in teacher-oriented classrooms dominated by teacher discourse and worksheets, that the development of oral language is not as progressive as that where children's literature dominates. And there is significant research supporting the benefits of using children's literature as an alternative or supplement to textbook-style learning, which may be all or most of what a child is exposed to in formal or public schooling. So as a homeschool family, we have an advantage in this area. So I wanted to, I want to go back to the nothing can separate us. Now we can learn a dry statistic about the Titanic, or we can read the story of Nan Harper and her father, who actually traveled on the Titanic. And this is a true story. And I'll tell you, you will be in tears by the end of it, because it's just a simple story. I mean, you can see that it's not for an older grade level. But her father, Nan's father, gave his life that day because he gave up his own spot on the lifeboat to others who had yet to become saved. And he preached the gospel as he went down. Isn't that amazing? And we learn about that through learning about Nan and her dad. I just love it. We can teach our kids about this tragedy, and we can teach them about the people who died without knowing Jesus. But a man who said, you know what, it's okay, I know him. So I'll go down with the ship. You guys go, get in the lifeboat so that you have more time. You know, that is inspiring. And we had a really great discussion about that. Like, would we be that brave? Would we make that sacrifice? And the reality of the Titanic, you know, delve deep into our hearts. It was a difficult thing that these people went through. It wasn't just a dry statistic. So I gave you your handout, and you have that so that you can kind of look over that again when you get home and your time is all filling up and the kids are doing crazy things and you're wondering if it's really worth it to take the time to do this every day. But if some of those reasons aren't totally convicting enough, there might be an even more important aspect to share stories with your kids, and that would be the spiritual, emotional, and moral advantage that we can gain. And this is what I'm most excited to emphasize. So I mentioned earlier about bonding by physically snuggling up close to hear what's being read. And I cannot tell you how many times that we got to cuddle, even as our kids became older. And sometimes when they're getting a little older, maybe they don't want to cuddle quite as much. But you know, when you're reading a story together, it just sort of happens. And so you might be all cozied up on the couch together, and people are like piling on top, and it's just it's a good time. And in fact, I think someone took a picture of me with my daughter reading the Nan Harper story about the sinking of the Titanic, and we had it up on our refrigerator for a long time. We read it more than once, but I was reading it, and I think my mom took a picture. It was very sweet. And it's just a good reminder of a special time when we were snuggled up close together, sharing those emotions over what happened with those people. And then you can, as I said, you are bonding by sharing this emotional experience. So some of my daughter's here, she will probably attest to the fact, and you could tell I just barely spoke about this book, and I would oftentimes not be able to finish the last little bit because I would get so choked up of all these books. And I would sometimes have to say, okay, just a second, because you're kind of reading ahead a little bit, and then you'd be experiencing all that, and it's just difficult to get through it sometimes, but it was very sweet. And also some of my husband Alan's best memories as a dad are of the times spent reading Chronicles of Narnia, and he would read that, and we, of course, it can go on for, there's so many books in the series, and that can go on for a long, long time, and that was something that he did in the evenings. He would just read that aloud, and he would make all the voices, and we would, all of us, be begging for more, but he would oftentimes end the chapter by saying, he would read the last sentence, and he'd say, and I'll tell you the rest tomorrow. And we'd all be like, no! And that was me too. I was doing that too. Oh, just one more chapter. But that was great, and we had so many great discussions because there's so much to learn through the analogies that are given throughout that series. You can discuss values, truth, ideas, morals. It's so much easier, less painful, as I mentioned earlier, to learn through stories of someone else's life than it is to learn the hard way through our own, or to be reprimanded for our own sinfulness. So when we're getting the finger pointed at us, it can kind of be our first instinct to put up a wall to defend ourselves and maybe not be willing to humble ourselves and think about what we have done in that way. I was just talking with a mom who has a 6th grade son who said that she's sometimes feeling like that all she's doing is lecturing him. And we do kind of start to feel that way sometimes as parents. And so she's going to try reading a good piece of literature with him every night as an activity so that they can have something to discuss, because she's realizing that he's just the same as she is. And he might understand it a little bit differently if they're reading it in a book, and then they can discuss it. And this is not talking about him, it's talking about this other person, this character in this piece of literature. And he's looking at it through the eyes of the character in the story, or through the eyes of the parent of the character in the story, or something like that even. So, and for instance, you can't help but become less self-centered too by learning about other cultures, places, times, and people where people lived differently. People have different circumstances than we do. You can see history as God's story, as His story, and expand your view of the world full of people that He's made. So I would say make it a point to read the uplifting, fun books, for sure, but also read the challenging or tragic stories, and also everything in between. And we have this biblical obligation to prepare our children how to respond to false, foolish, or questionable ideas. So one way we can do that is by walking alongside them through a world of ideas, beliefs, and arguments, and we can do that vicariously through books. So I wrote down a few scriptures here that I wanted to share. Ecclesiastes 7, verse 12 says, "For the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money, and the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of him who has it." In Daniel 1:17, "As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams." Proverbs 1:5, "Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance." Proverbs 16:22, "Good sense is a fountain of life to him who has it, but the instruction of fools is folly." And I guess I was thinking good sense can come from these discussions and come from what we learn through books. Acts 7:22, "And Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in his words and deeds." Proverbs 18:15, "An intelligent heart acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge." Proverbs 28:2, "When a land transgresses, it has many rulers, but with a man of understanding and knowledge, its stability will long continue." And then we know from Titus 2:1, we're instructed to teach what accords with sound doctrine. So you may be thinking, well, yeah, my kids can read these books and kind of learn for themselves that way. And that's true, they can. But if you are reading alongside them, if you are having this experience together, you will be able to teach them according to sound doctrine. They are not always going to receive that from the books that they are engaging with. So, and as you can be cautious, you can be, I'm sure you're being very discerning about what your children are reading, but as I said, we are called to be in the world and not of the world. We're called to be like soldiers for the cause of Christ. Soldiers have to train, and one of the ways that we can do that, because we're up against this enemy that's crafty, dangerous, and stealthy, we have to engage our children biblically with dangerous ideas and worldly ideas in small steps while we have them at home so that we can train them and mature them in wisdom as a believer. And if they're off reading this on their own, we are not going to be able to have those discussions with them. So reading aloud is really the key in this aspect to helping prepare them. And I guess that since we're called to be soldiers, and we're training our little soldiers, that kind of makes us drill sergeants, right? I was thinking about that today. So it's kind of, in a way, it's a little bit like giving your child an inoculation. You know, you're giving them little bits and pieces of history, of culture, and all sorts of things. They're in little doses where you can discuss it with them, so that when things get tough or they get into a morally fuzzy situation, they know what to do, to like tune back in to hear the still small voice. So to me, I think that's the most important aspect of this. But as far as with discussing some of the moral aspects and things, and like examples of some books that can get you talking, I want to show you, I think I brought it along with me today, but I'm not for sure if I did or not. I might not have grabbed it. I think I mentioned in December a book called The Peace Child, and that is a book about, it's a very inspiring story of missionaries who, and it's a true story, it's absolutely riveting, and it's somewhat terrifying, actually. So how many of you have read it? Okay, yeah, it's like terrifying. When you read the very first part of it, you're like, I had this, like, I'm not sure if we should be reading this because this is very scary, because it was talking about deception and murder, and this tribe was setting up, they were befriending this young man from another village, if I remember correctly how it starts out, and then they have in their culture the highest basically standard was to trick someone and then cannibalize them. I mean, it was just absolutely, I'm telling you, we were just like, I just don't know if we should read this. But we kept going. We were able to discuss it. We kind of could, just take little breaks and things. And some people might consider that controversial to read that with their child. But we read those kinds of stories because that is a true story. And it has an amazing ending, and it's so absolutely inspiring to see how God used that situation. And I thought, how are these people ever going to be able to hear the gospel? I mean, this is just, I mean, if anybody couldn't be reached, this would, this is the group. But because they thought when they were hearing about Judas that he was the hero in the gospel story. And so I was like, oh my goodness. But you just have to keep going. So I really encourage you to read things like that, because that is one of our favorite books. We look back now, we love that book. We read it more than once. And I'm glad we didn't quit when it got a little bit scary. So there's also another book that's entitled The Matchlock Gun, and that has a theme that could also really make us think. And this book is currently being criticized for its negative stereotypical depiction of Native Americans. The foreword explains that the characters were real people. They were the Van Alstyne family who actually experienced the events. Tunis and Gertrude were the mother and father of Trudy and Edward. They had trekked all the way from Holland to England, and then they finally came to America to be free. And the year was 1757. and the Native Americans were aiding the French in the French and Indian War. And Edward is the little boy whose actions during an attack on their home by the Indians provide this central action. The matchlock gun that the title comes from is this huge antique that they have over their fireplace, and it has this big trumpet-like barrel on it, and it's too big for Edward to pick up. So before Tunis goes out on this military foray, he shows Edward how to prop the gun up on the table so that he can light the fuse on the gun and fire it in the event of an attack by Indians. And sure enough, Indians do attack while Tunis is gone. And Gertrude, the mother, is outside at the time. She runs for the house in a prearranged scheme, of defense that they've set up. And when she gets onto the porch, she screams, Edward, and she says it like Atward because they're from Holland originally, and that is the cue when she screams his name for him to light the gun. And so he does, but he's not in time to save his mother from getting tomahawked in the shoulder. And the gun does blast, and it kills 3 Indians. I believe that the criticism of this book is unwarranted especially because it relates a true story of adult men attempting to murder a woman and 2 children in their home. And to those that would remove this excellently written book from the library shelves, I just say they are supporting censorship, and they are promoting anti-intellectual freedom. And I think it needs to remain on the shelves for others to decide. But it's something that you might want to explore with your children. It's a little bit of a different idea. But it's a true story of something that a family actually experienced. And that's there from one viewpoint. So, you have to make that clear to your children when you're reading these things. But I think people, even children, if given the chance, are intelligent enough to know when views are from another time or from a certain viewpoint, and they can glean from a good classic book like The Matchlock Gun. So I recommend that book. Those 2 books and others like them, such as The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom, those will get you thinking and talking in your home about things, moral, political, economic, and legal issues. We're raising up courageous and discerning leaders who will be, hopefully, rebels for the cause of Christ. The most important thing to remember is to use God's word, not your own human reasoning, as the standard in all your discussions of these vital areas. And like I said, you are teaching sound doctrine. So in order to be teaching, you have to be involved, and so you have to be discussing. So we had a child who felt very convicted after reading a book called Living on the Devil's Doorstep. And some of these I did not bring today, but I brought some others that are in this one, which is in the same series. It's called International Adventures, and this one is Torches of Joy, and it's by John Decker. And some of you might know his son Ted Decker is an author. Also, our daughter was just mentioning they're starting a series a fictional series, Dragons, something. And They Found Dragons, and that's by their son Ted. But anyway, this is a great story, Torches of Joy, highly recommend it. And when you're reading this out loud, your kids are going to be riveted. I mean, they just love this stuff. They're going to eat it up. And even younger ones, like this is a Stone Age tribe's encounter with the gospel. And the things that these people experienced, it's in recent history. It was in 1960. In 1960, the 25,000 Dani tribes people hidden away in the remote Toli Valley of Irian Jaya used only stone tools and had no written language. Then in one generation, they took the always dangerous, sometimes fatal leap from the Stone Age into the 20th century. At this critical time, John and Helen Decker gave themselves to the Dani, helping them discover the gospel of Jesus Christ and their destiny as helpers of other tribes. Today, the 79 churches of the Toli Valley, with 13,000 baptized believers, have sent out 65 couples to other tribes needing the gospel. a chapter from a present-day book of Acts. Torches of Joy is a model for cross-cultural mission strategy and one of the 20th century's most striking chronicles of God's grace and power. This couple spent 21 years in Irian Jaya, this is a novel, so you can read. It's just a story. Your kids are going to hear it as a story, and you're going to hear it as a story, and you can just read little bits at a time. You can you pick through it. If your kids are younger and you wanted to read this and experience it, and they're just maybe some of it's a little above them, skip some of it. That's okay too. So you can do that. You're allowed. So that's and The Hiding Place. I mentioned The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom. I do have that up here also. The Christian Heroes Then and Now series, there are lots of these. I highly recommend these. This one's Hudson Taylor, Deep in the Heart of China, and you can see it's not you can read this aloud easily to younger kids. We would escape to learn about the Nile, Egypt, and this Mara, daughter of the Nile. This was a compelling story of adventure, romance, and intrigue set in ancient Egypt. Mara is a proud and beautiful slave girl who yearns for freedom. In order to gain it, she finds herself playing the dangerous role of double spy for two arch enemies, each of whom supports a contender for the throne of Egypt. Against her will, Mara finds herself falling in love with one of her masters, and she starts to believe in his plans of restoring Thutmose III to the throne. But just when Mara is ready to offer him her help and her heart, her duplicity is discovered, and a battle ensues in which both Mara's life and the fate of Egypt are at stake. It says, dangerous espionage, an unusual love story, and richly drawn background make this a book to capture quick and lasting interest. Thoroughly engrossing. But you can skip some of the romance if you want. It's not anything that you have to be scared of, but you can discuss it with your kids. That's the point. Amos Fortune Freeman, this one is a great one. This man was born the son of a king in Africa, and when he was only 15 years old, he was captured by slave traders. So you can imagine the rest of his story. By the time he was 60 years old, it says that he was able to realize his dream of freedom, and so that's an excellent one. The Red Badge of Courage, very good. Again, some of these are difficult things to read. We read Leonardo da Vinci. Some of these are from. These were older. These are some of these are definitely for the older crowd. But Fallen Angels. This is about Vietnam. Tough stuff. A lot of tough stuff. All Quiet on the Western Front. You've probably heard of this. I am young. I am 20 years old. Yet I know nothing of life but despair, death, fear. It's just, it's a tough thing. This is the testament of Paul Baumer, who enlists with his classmates in the German army of World War I. They become soldiers with youthful enthusiasm, but the world of work, duty, culture, and progress they had been taught breaks into pieces under the first bombardment in the trenches. Through years of vivid horror, Paul holds fast to a single vow: to fight against the principle of hate that meaninglessly pits young men of the same generation but different uniforms against each other, if only he can come out of the war alive. The Killer Angels, this is an epic novel. I would really recommend this. This is Civil War, so highly recommend. This one is entitled The Everlasting Flame, and it is kind of a little bit of a romance, but there's not much to it other than, there's not anything to it other than just kind of a connection. But this is a great one if you're learning about the time of like William Tyndale and the sacrifices that people made to ensure that we would today have the Word of God at our disposal. I mean, these people died so that we could have the Word of God. And so this is a novel about that, and it just makes it come alive. You know, you can learn, you can read about William Tyndale, but you read a novel about these people, and your kids are like in it, you know, and they understand it in a completely different way. They're emotionally engaged. This one, The Ides of April. This is Rome, AD 62. Under the cornice that topped the columns of red marble, clear in the light of a lamp, stood Aulus with one hand outstretched before him as if to receive a gift. He was staring down at it, and the eyes of every slave in both courtyards followed his, for the hand was as red and dark as the marble. Hylas started toward him, and the movement seemed to release the bond of fear that had held the other slaves still. Aulus stumbled forward and fell on his knees beside the fish tank in the center of the atrium, plunging his whole arm into the water between the lily leaves. At the same time, he began to cry, the wheezing sob of a small child who will howl louder when he has got his breath. Hylas shook him as one shakes a small child to stop the noise. Who is it? There was death in Alice's face, and more deaths than one, but he did not answer. The women behind were whimpering now. Where was the steward? He ought to have been there to take charge. Hylas ran through into the peristyle. So it's murder by one slave in a Roman household meant death for the other slaves. When the senator was found stabbed, the 17-year-old secretary Hylas manages to escape arrest. In a desperate attempt to save his mother and fellow slaves, he's unexpectedly helped by Varro, a secret Christian, through whom he enlists the help of Camillus, a young tribune. Camillus soon finds himself reluctantly picking a dangerous way through the political plots of Nero's Rome to discover the real murderer. So you learn about what the Ides of April are from reading this book, and so I highly recommend that. I mentioned about Young Fu, couple by Jean Fritz. If you're What's the Big Idea? Ben Franklin. These are great. They're not very difficult, very long, but so informative, so informative. And Then What Happened? Paul Revere, great one, highly recommend. And then Sequoia and the Cherokee alphabet. By the 1770s, the European colonists had settled along America's eastern seaboard and begun to move west into the lands still held by Indians. The Cherokee Indians were told to either give up their traditional ways of life and adopt the ways of the white people, or give up their land and make way for the settlers. But Sequoia, a lame Cherokee craftsman, saw a way for his people to live among the whites but still keep their Indian culture. So there are some other books in this series as well. You can read some great classics like Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. Oh my goodness, this is just a fun one, but it's so informative also. This one I think has some illustrations in it, pretty sure. It's a little bit longer, but it's got some great illustrations. You guys are welcome to come peruse through these when we're done. Or take a look at any of these books that I have up here as well. So the child that I mentioned that was from the International Adventures book, one of those was Living on the Devil's Doorstep, and he said that book so deeply affected him that it changed his life. So you're going to have that. If you really dive in to literature, you make it part of your life, and you share these experiences with your kids, you're going to see that effectual change. So the question is kind of when and how then to fit it in, because chances are that you're probably doing quite a bit already. So here are just this is where just a lot of personal experience comes in, and I'm sure that you have some really great ideas about this already, and probably you're already incorporating some of it. I think we were going to discuss a little bit, but I'll just share a few to get us thinking. So one would be during snack time after school. That's a good time, after you're done with your formal schooling. while supper's being prepared by one parent, the other can be having a reading time, cuddle with the kids, like something kind of easy for dad to do when he gets home too, where he's not like, because sometimes the kids are just like all over him, and so then this might be a special thing that they could do. They just get right on the couch and he could read them a chapter, while you're getting things together for dinner. Obviously you can switch this all up. You don't have to do it the same way all the time. But it also can keep them distracted from the, I'm starving, when we're going to eat problem. So the obvious one would be like before bed. And I told you about our Chronicles of Narnia experience. But I didn't tell you, I don't think, that our kids' ages at the time were 7, 6, and 4 when we started the Chronicles of Narnia. And so it took us a year and a half to get through that series, which actually I think that's pretty good, probably, for that age especially. But years later then, when the Hollywood movie versions started coming out, we were able to go see them together, and our kids unanimously said, yeah, it was good, but it wasn't as good as when Dad read it to us. And so, how's that for childhood imagination, right? So you can read while you're doing some chores. I think I mentioned this in December during the panel discussion. If you're doing something like mundane, like folding piles of clothes, and you're kind of trying to train your children also how to assist with these kinds of daily tasks, it's such a never-ending job, so you kind of have to try and make it fun if you can, and it makes it just so much more fun to manage the laundry and your kids if you can incorporate reading or listening to an audiobook during that time. Also, like if you're outside and you're working in the garden, pulling weeds on a hot day can get pretty old pretty quick, and so if you can kind of take turns, if you have an older child in the family, or a little bit older even, somebody who's just a little bit older, you can have them take a few minutes and they can read a few pages and take a break, and that can be their break, from weeding. You can set up a tent like in the front yard this spring. Grab a tent, set it up in the yard, and face the door south, so that you can catch the rays at the first sign of decent temperatures, and just throw all kinds of old blankets and things in there, and pillows and all that. Get the kitties all together, the kitty cat's in there with you, and just get some fresh air and sunshine, and have an adventure to another land. You might not have the finances, you might not have a passport, you might not have a COVID vaccine, but you can get a book and you can go to another land. You can pick up a giant cardboard box. You can get these at like local appliance stores, because they have all these humongous boxes, or like a do-it-yourself place or whatever. You can purchase them even online now, ones that you can put together to do stuff like this. But you could read books with, depending on what like time period that you might be studying in school or something, or even whatever, not even related to your school work. But you could, if you're doing castles, kings, queens, princesses and squires, there's a book called The Princess and the Kiss that's a really good one, and they have it for girls, and they have a companion book for boys. So you could make a castle, and read that. Audiobooks are so great. They are such a huge resource, and I'm so happy that they're becoming so much more commonplace now. I feel like they have such value, and it's just such a wonderful, wonderful world to get to know, and they really saved my sanity on numerous occasions. We would actually check out cassette tapes back in the day from the library, and every year for just years and years, our family, my parents would take us down to Branson, Missouri for a few days, and it's a little bit of a drive to get down there. So, and especially when you're with kids, and so you put an audio book in, or if someone else was driving, I could have one of our read alouds and I could read. Now my back would get a little, after you're sitting in the front seat and you're like this for a while, but that's when you go see Lori and when you get home. But yeah, they're great for, audiobooks are great for when you need a break from reading or you like can't physically do it at the time, like as when you're driving, and we are from a rural area, so we have to drive everywhere we go. When you're washing dishes, when you're anything, like you name it, there are so many times when you cannot physically be reading a book, but you can have an audiobook going. And they have such terrific professional readers sometimes, or oftentimes now, so your kids can learn, how to read with inflection and how proper sentences sound. It might be a good place to start or supplement your own reading too, especially if you aren't a very confident reader yourself. Some people just are not confident readers, and so audiobooks would be a really good resource. But remember, studies do show that it doesn't matter what education the parents have themselves. The important thing is that they take time to read with their kids at home. So I did touch on the books, what to read. And like I had said with the Peace Child, sometimes you might think it's just too full of, you might think it's a little scary, or maybe you might get into a book and you might think it's just too full of bad ideas. I don't really want to go there right now. And you don't want to spend the entire book lecturing and discussing. In that case, you can just say, well, it looks like this author has some really bad ideas about how this character should live her life, huh? So I don't think we're going to read this one right now. Let's find a better book, So you can just, you don't be afraid to start a book and then just put it down. And your kids are going to learn from that experience too. Some of them say there are going to be some fails. So if you're not going to be reading the book with your child, I would highly recommend looking carefully at the publisher. There are certain publishing companies that I would trust highly and others I would not, and I might have included those. I'm not for sure. Did I talk about any of the publishers yet? We can talk about that during the discussion. But as far as where and how to find good books, like I said, look to the publishers, definitely. There are really good book lists out there, like in these books. Suggestions from trusted friends, I highly recommend that. And then I also really recommend going on to sunlight.com, request a free catalog. Sunlight Curriculum, they are a literature-based curriculum, and they have just a gazillion books, and that's the official term, I'm pretty sure, listed according to grade level, which is really helpful. So I personally would rather hold a catalog than stare at a screen, so they'll send you a catalog. So I would just request it and get a catalog. And then you can request books at your local library. So say you see something in the Sunlight catalog. Now, if you're doing the actual Sunlight curriculum, trust me, I have tried this because we did Sunlight, and I tried to borrow a lot of the books from the library, and that became overwhelming for me. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend that strategy, but I would recommend if you're not using a literature-based curriculum and you're just gleaning some of these and you're kind of cherry picking some different ones that you would want to include in your family life or to complement the curriculum that you're using, then go to your library. They can get these things for you. I had my eyes open to interlibrary loan back in the day, and you all probably know all about it, but that is a wonderful source, and our local library is wonderful about that. So if they don't have something, they will get it for you, and most of the time, someone has it somewhere in this country, and they can get it, and you can keep it for a month, and usually you can get through it by then, most of the time. So I recommend it. You can always recheck it later if you need to. And also I mentioned if you're looking for inexpensive books, the library is oftentimes, they'll have these sales, they're trying to get rid of old books, and they'll have these penny or dime sales or just giveaways, and a lot of those books are really good books. You'll find these, they're practically, ancient hardbacks, they're falling apart, but they're made well. They've got that great spine, and they were put together well. So they may not have the prettiest covers anymore, but the story's just as good. So you can still get what you need from them, and just as with any time, you kind of have to be discerning though, like what you go home with, because you may end up with some crazy ideas. But Facebook would probably, I'm guessing Facebook groups, there have to be some Facebook groups. I don't know about those, but I'm sure that there are. There are probably groups specifically for like literature-based curriculums, such as Sunlight, that those would be a really good resource, because even if you weren't using Sunlight as your primary curriculum, you could get on there, and you could glean some information about some great books to complement your own curriculum, even if it's not literature-based. So anyway, I hope I've inspired you a little bit today. Maybe go home, make yourself a good cup of Earl Grey tea. Find a good story, though, regardless of whether you've got the tea or not. Find a good story and share it with your kids. And just, you're not going to regret a moment of it, I guarantee you, from experience, and that you're going to just have memories that you're going to treasure for a lifetime. Your kids are going to profit from it academically, spiritually, emotionally, morally, and your family's going to be the closer for it. So that is the end. And maybe we'll have a little bit of discussion now. Did you write some things down, Olivia?
Yes, I will just close so that I can take us offline.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
So I will just close with a word, thank you, a word of prayer, and then just give a few announcements for the next time. So, Lord, thank you so much for this time that we can get together as moms, raising warriors for you. And thank you for Kristen and just all of the resources that she's given us, the ideas and encouragement. And I pray that we would have a good discussion time here now, and that we might raise our kids to glorify you and to love you. In Jesus' name, amen. So our next home group is going to be March 10th, and the speaker is Sharon Pilling, and I am blanking on the topic. Do you happen to have it? I know it's something to do with like making school enjoyable, but I don't know the exact topic. But that is going to be in March. And then also, like I said, Jen isn't here, and I feel very unprepared, but she normally has the snack sign-up sheet. So if any of you guys wanted to sign up for that, if you want to just let me know, and then I can let Jen know. And if Nicole figures out the topic, then I'll tell you guys it later. But thank you so much for coming. Okay, so does anybody